Thanks again for the invitation and the organization of this great event. It's always a great pleasure and a source of inspiration to listen to all of you and to have the opportunity to discuss. And as we already heard 5 presentations, I have somehow the advantage to enter into a dialogue also with some of you, to be inspired, and at the same time I will try to hold my own presentation. So let's see how successful I will be. Anders, what you just told us about Hungary, I mean, it's fascinating and frightening at the same time. I mean, in many other places, also in Germany, so many of those elements are also present. I mean, we have, I will speak about it in a second, a relatively young party, probably most of you heard about it, the so-called Alternative for Germany, and they probably do like 95% of what the Orban government does. So it's really so striking in terms of the rhetoric, the images, and of course the political positions. So, and I'm sure, of course, there are also some, formal or informal kind of meetings where they talk to each other and learn from each other. But yeah, there are probably also some other mechanisms. Okay, I structured my presentation into this 3 parts. So I speak a little bit about the influx of 2015-2016, the background. I mean, we heard already a little bit about it. Then the longer-term context of migration politics to Germany, because, I mean, otherwise you wouldn't understand the reactions. And in many these debates, you have the feeling that actually the topic of immigration only emerged in 2015, which is, of course, not the case, but we need this long-term perspective. And then I focus a little bit on the reactions, debates, and the policies after 2015. Okay. I mean, you can still and very often hear that all the arrival of those, let's roughly say 1 million refugees and migrants to Europe and Germany is somehow the result of an opening of borders or of an intentional invitation policy by the German government. You can hear this within Germany, but also in other countries. And for me, it's important to come back to this point because it's obvious. In my view, it's completely wrong. First of all, I mean, borders were not open because within the Schengen area, I mean, borders were already open, and it was the decision of the German government not to close borders, right? But it was discussed. Police was actually ready, within this project. I also talked to members of the police, and they were actually prepared. They were just also ready, and they were also convinced that they could seal the German borders. But then, in the end, the government decided not to do this because they were afraid of a number of negative consequences, which are often somehow put to the side, right? I mean, this is what right-wing politics is all about. You present very easy solutions, and you just neglect consequences. So yes. Borders were not closed, and of course it was not an invitation policy. I mean, I put those 2 pictures from summer 2015. Actually, this is around early September, and you can see. I mean, on the one picture you see, Hungarian police trying to stop basically a family. I mean, they just pulled them out of a train because they didn't want to stay there, and you can see, what it makes to human beings. And this was actually the other alternative, to continue stopping people by force. Including families. And on the other picture, you see people who started, walking on the highway on their own. So that was actually the context of that decision. Okay, we don't use force to stop those people, right? Of course, they underestimated the flow, but nobody could have actually, came up with the calculation of how many people would actually come. But many people forgot the context. So I'd say this the decision, which also was not unilateral, because it was there was actually discussion with the Austrians and also the Hungarian government. It was a last-minute reaction rather than active policy, and of course, I don't have the time to go really into the complex causalities behind movements. Already this morning, I also had the feeling that we often understand migration as something very simple. But researchers, migration researchers always point to the fact that international migration is something very complicated. People have to have resources. People have to take a lot of risks. And more broadly speaking, of course, the numbers of international migrants, the absolute number is rising from year to year, but very slowly. And if you put this into perspective, if we compare to the size of the global population, it is almost stable since the 1970s, right? It's about 3%. So, and most of international migration actually takes place within regions. So that's the amazing thing. If you have a look at the global picture, I also present some refugee numbers in a second. The numbers we are talking here about here in the European context are actually limited. 1 million people for the European Union, even if it would be 2 or 3 million people, it's not such a huge number. It's more about fears. It's more about millions could come, right? So that's somehow the main narrative. And I see the events of 2015 actually as a failure of international and European cooperation, because people knew there was an exceptional crisis in Syria and also in the neighborhood, and in the past the German government didn't have a very good record when it comes to cooperation within the EU in terms when it comes to migration, right? But in this case, German government, with some other governments, they wanted to have a more coherent and coordinated approach. They proposed an admission scheme. So the idea was to somehow organize migration, but very few other governments actually wanted to join in. And then, everything came to kind of a standstill, and migrants and refugees decided on their own. It's something also which was a bit missing this morning, the agency actually of migrants and refugees. It's not only about governments, deciding who's going here or there. It's actually almost impossible. That's my thesis. Almost impossible to stop large numbers of migrants and refugees if you want to at the same time respect human rights. And this was kind of a situation of 2015. Yeah. And this kind of blaming the German government. I'm not saying this because I'm German. You might think, okay, this guy is from Berlin. It's not a surprise he defends the German government. Because I'm saying this kind of blaming, okay, here's this German government. They invited everybody, so they should, take care of the consequences. This is of course, a misreading of what actually happened. And for me, it's kind of a strategy of responsibility shifting and political rent-seeking. Because also, people do it inside Germany as well, right? They say, hey, even they break it down to the person of Angela Merkel, right? So it's also a very theatrical way of understanding politics. Okay, why did people actually come to Germany? Here, it's in German. Don't understand to read it. It's a survey, and they asked people who came recently to Germany. Asylum seekers. Why Germany, right? Of course, this is an ex post survey, so you have to be careful a bit. But the first point is really respect for human rights. So they have somehow the vision of Germany as being a country which respects human rights. And then, of course, the second point is also interesting. The German educational system probably can be explained by the fact that most of those asylum seekers are very young, right? And that also gives us an idea that, of course, people are seeking protection, but also, want to continue their lives, right? They're not only humanitarian beings, but they also want to study, work, and so on. So this kind of clear-cut distinction between migrants, economic migrants, and asylum seekers is, of course, necessary in terms of how to deal with those people, but it's, of course, if you want to understand the phenomenon is a lot too easy. Then we have, of course, 26% say social welfare, but it's only 26%, it's not 80% or something like that, right? And then if you take together some of the other points, it's a lot about other family members already living in the country or people from the same country or the same area. So, it's a mix of factors which can actually explain why people came to Germany. And then you can't, I checked it in the break, I can see a map actually on my screen, but you can't, I'm afraid. So you have to imagine the world map behind those numbers. Actually here you see refugees in the world, right? And we heard about Turkey. But as you can see here, most 84%, I guess, last year of the world refugees don't live in industrialized countries. And Germany is like the only, Western democracy which is among the top five countries when it comes to hosting refugees and also asylum seekers. But and the German government is too, not also only government, but also the public is a little bit proud of this. The majority, I'd say. But of course, you also have to see Germany is a huge country, a powerful country, so they can actually deal with those numbers. And if you make just the reality check with if you put the numbers into perspective, then you see Germany is not on the list of the top 10 countries. If you put refugee numbers, if you compare them to the population, so the value for Germany would be around 12, I guess. Here. Okay, longer term context. I will simplify a lot. Germany received millions of immigrants and refugees in the past, but didn't, understand, or in its self-image and also its policies, didn't accept the fact that it is actually an immigration country. So there were no integration policies. There was this fiction of everybody would return, and at the same time, there's a growing, demographic deficit. We had very low numbers of immigration in the early 2000s. High protection rates of refugees also, because in the past there was always this discourse about all of those asylum seekers, they're actually kind of bogus refugees, they don't need protection and so on. So against this background, a political consensus emerged that Germany was actually a country of immigration and that immigration and integration policies need to be, implemented. Because in the past, policies were mainly about returning people. That was the idea, but of course it didn't work. So here you can, you have an overview of immigration to Germany over the last decades. You can see that, the green line is all arrivals. This includes refugees, but also people from other EU countries, software engineers from India and so on. And the blue line is, departures. So you can see that almost, in every single year, there's some exceptions. There was more migration. You can also see more migration than immigration. And you can also see, of course, that the years of 2014 until present are somehow exceptional in terms of absolute numbers here. And I wanted to raise your attention also to the fact that only in the year of 2015-16, migrants and asylum seekers from outside Europe were the most important group. But in all of the other years before and now, it's all about EU migration, intra-EU migration, which you can see here. The first column is about EU migration, internal migration, and the second is asylum seekers, right? So there's this, and for the years 2015 to 2017. And then you have some other categories, like family migration and labor migration and so on. Of course, the German government would like to raise this part of migration, which is like skilled migration, and would like to reduce this. But here again, most of EU migration is actually skilled migration. So we always have to be careful about those legal categories. They just blur the picture a bit, but give us just a very broad overview. So as I said, there was a process where of course, which is still ongoing. So Germany somehow had a coming of age of being an immigration country since 1998, I'd say, and you can see some of the elements here. So, and this was actually somehow the political climate before 2015, right? So we need immigration, we need to integrate people, we need to give rights to people. So that's why I would say that Germany was structurally well prepared for the integration of refugees. Also, I mean, labor markets development was very positive, which doesn't mean that there were not conflicts and debates, going on all the time. Okay, I will skip a few things since I'm running out of time. Of course, you can see it's the topic of migration is the yellow line here. It's by far the most important topic. Was and still is, but it's losing salience, as you can see. It's going down. But maybe I'd like to, because we always, to think about the political construction of migration. And here you can see that's an interesting fact here. Actually, immigration numbers are going down, but here they're just going up. There's a little spike there. And that's not because more people came, that's only because there was an intense conflict between Horst Seehofer from the Bavarian sister party and the Conservative Party, the CDU, at that time during the elections in Bavaria, ahead of the elections in Bavaria, where actually there was also a debate within the CSU that they said, okay, we can't have a kind of an extreme right party beside to us, so we want to have a tough policy on migration, and finally it didn't work. And they changed their discourse since then, but you can see that, of course, it has a huge impact on the debate. I will, you all know this. There were huge and still is, unprecedented wave of support, but also conflicts. I already mentioned the success of the AfD. They're now in all regional parliaments and also the Bundestag, of course. There's still high numbers of xenophobic attacks. And what was really special, about the political reactions, is that you had a very open conflict within the government for a very long period of time, which you can see also in the picture. Even the threat to end the coalition. This is now over. I'll skip this also. Many laws have been passed, trying to regulate. On the one hand, the idea was to integrate people more quickly. On the other hand, the idea is, of course, to return as many as people to their countries of origin, which is not working very well, as in all other countries, because it's a complicated thing to do. I describe this in more detail in the article in the book. So let me finish with, there are of course two challenges. One is of course the integration of a lot of people into the German society. It's if you take all categories together, like asylum seekers, recognized refugees, people who are rejected but will probably stay, and so on. It's almost 2 million people, 1.8 million people. And the integration of those people will take a lot of time. It's not an easy thing to do. Many of them will probably also return. Nobody knows how many, but not everybody will stay. But many will stay. So they have to learn the language. They have to be integrated into the labor market. And this so far goes pretty well. It's faster than compared to to the past, which has to do with the labor market situation, but also with policy making, because people have access to integration and so on, which in the past didn't. Integration courses, language classes, and so on, which didn't exist in the past. So far, I guess 35% of those asylum seekers and refugees arrived after 2015 are already, participate in the labor market. But this will take years. It's not an easy thing, right? It really will take probably a decade But the real issue is actually, for me, it's the challenge of, as I call it here, social coherence, or let's say the political consensus. I said there was a political consensus before 2015 that Germany is a country of immigration, Germany needs migration, Germany needs skilled migration. Germany also has an important role to play in the global refugee regime, so humanitarian, humanitarian responsibility. Now what I can say is that the coalition at least returns to some kind of pragmatic policy making. There's no more, we don't see an open conflict anymore. We have an easing of conflict in most of the surveys, so people are more relaxed. But we still have a higher level of conflict and political violence, which is there. I mean, numbers of attacks are going down, but we have really, a change in discourse, but also there's some attacks here and there. Just last week, somebody with a right-wing background wanted to attack a synagogue, it didn't work, he killed some other people. I mean, this kind of events, we didn't have this before, right? So we have this from time to time now. We have the structural establishment of the AfD into the German political system, so it will remain there for a while. So the question is somehow, okay, do we have still this political consensus on immigration? I'd say yes, but of course it's, given all what happened and also the establishment of the AfD, political leaders are a lot more careful, I'd say, and then. Of course, also remains an open question, right? I mean, it will never be at kind of a stable moment, so it needs to be further observed. And of course, I'm happy to also to answer questions on how the EU, maybe the German government or society observes EU integration, but not so much integration, but I mean, let's say cooperation in the field of asylum and migration, which is part of the article, but not of my discussion today. Okay, thank you.